Today, we're going to be putting a lift kit on the winter beater here. This is my 2003 Chevy 1500. Lately, I've been letting my girlfriend drive it as I have a company truck. This truck I bought for about 1/3 of the price of her white crew cab. Figured this would probably be a better winter beater than her truck because we don't really want her truck to get rusty. This truck was a Texas truck that was brought up here, and it is still fairly clean. Well, you know what I mean by clean. Obviously, it's not very clean as far as dirt and grime. This is all salt from Indiana roads. So, but the body is actually fairly solid still. And the one thing I do not like about 1500s is you cannot tuck a set of 33 12.5s to save your life. So this truck already has a rough country leveling kit on it, which I'm not very fond of because they kind of ride like crap. And I cannot tuck these tires at all. So I cut the bumper, which, you know, some people like doing, some people don't because it looks kind of janky, but had to for one, or else couldn't make it turn at all. But it still hits the back of the fender. Luckily, we haven't hit any bumps hard enough to where it pushes the fender in. So we're gonna fix that today by raising it up 6 inches. So down here we have a Zone Off-Road 6-inch lift. If you don't know, this is like the poor man's BDS. These lifts are made by the same manufacturers as BDS, but they're about 50% cheaper. So same quality, they might have a different warranty, but same manufacturers as BDS. Now initially, I was gonna buy a rough country lift because I had one on my gold truck and it rode great. But the guy I get my parts from said no, he's not ordering me one because he hates them. Okay, so I paid a little bit more for the Zone. It's a couple $100 more than a rough country, not a big deal. I'm hoping it rides the same, if not better. But essentially, I'm not trying to dump a whole lot of money into this truck. I just want to be able to tuck 33s. So amongst a couple other small issues, the truck needs upper control arms and upper ball joints. The pitman arm and idler arm are pretty much shot, and the ABS light is on for a wheel speed sensor, so we're just going to be putting brand new wheel bearings in it. As you can see here, that is the upper ball joint. It is pretty much torched, and this is on both sides. And then the jack right now is jacking up only the driver's side, which means the passenger side is planted. And this is how much movement there is because of the crappy pitman and idler arm. So those need to get replaced pronto. And then I also have a set of ORD hanger flips or shackle flips, whatever you want to call them, for the rear of the truck. This will replace the use of a lift block. So pretty much we'll be able to keep the stock U-bolts and the stock blocks that are in the back and use these. And this will drop it 4 inches or so. And then depending on how well the lift goes, I also have a roll pan that I'll be installing rather than the rear bumper. So we got pretty much everything unboxed. This came in 5 separate boxes. The first box I got was the rear shocks, which are sitting on the workbench there. Front shocks were in a separate box. We got all this stuff here. We're obviously not going to be using the blocks and the U-bolts because of the hanger flip. So we got the skid plate, the new mount for the front diff, the diff drop bracket here, the CV spacers, your spindles here, and then I believe these are your bump stop drops, which I'll probably not be using either. The sway bars, or my bad, sway bar links. We got all our hardware here, our install instruction manual, and then we have the control arm drops along with the torsion bar, cross member, drop brackets, and then some kicker bars. So the one cool thing that I like about the Zone lift so far is that it comes with kicker bars rather than the rough country, which you have to buy extra. So by the time you buy your extra rough country kicker bars, you're probably going to be at about the same price as a Zone lift. If I'm being totally honest, I bought a $1,400 lift just so I can get these cool stickers to put on my truck. Obviously, I'm not going to be installing the lift. I'm just going to be installing the stickers so that everyone knows I drive a lifted Chevrolet. So your first step here is to take your instruction manual and get rid of it, because I'm going to be walking you through the entire install. I know when I installed my first and second lift kit, I was really looking for a YouTube video because I was too lazy to read through the instructions. So bear with me. I'm going to go through everything and be as in-depth as possible. I'll probably go over the torque specs and all that, but it is crucial that you still take notes of what the torque specs are. And then there is one other thing in that manual that you will need. So basically, you also want to take note of your recommended alignment specifications and then give this to your alignment shop. They should know what to do, but if not, it's a good reference here. And for all you sorry asses out there who are, I don't have a lift, I can't put my lift kit on without a lift. Well, we're gonna be doing it on the floor. So here's the video for you. As you can see, the lift is taken up by my dad's OBS, which I will have another video coming out for that. But yeah, we're gonna do it on the floor. So all you need is a jack stand, a floor jack and a couple of jack stands. So that being said, first thing you wanna do is get the front end of the truck up as high as you can. So as you can see, I got a piece of 4x4 lumber on the jack. And then you're gonna take your jack stands and put them on your frame. Now you don't want them to interfere with your torsion bars because you're gonna be pulling those torsion bars out. So you want it kind of out of the way of the torsion bars and then underneath the frame rail. So that's gonna basically let you take everything off of the front suspension. Next, you're gonna pull your wheels off on both sides. And now you're pretty much just gonna disassemble the entire front of the truck. So pop these little caps off. There's the nuts for the CV axles under here. As you can see, some sped put this in upside down. That's interesting. So you're gonna need a big socket for this. This is probably the only, maybe not the only, but one of the tools that you won't find in a standard tool kit. I believe this is like a 36 millimeter. I'll have to check. So we're gonna go ahead and pull the caliper off. We're not gonna pull the caliper from the bracket separately. We're gonna pull it all together. And then you're gonna have to loosen these 10 millimeter bolts and pull these out for the brake line. And then what I like to do is hang it from the frame here where it's got this notch. I've got a couple heavy duty hooks that I use, and it's basically gonna dangle there until the lift is complete. So we got the brake line bolts out. The bracket bolts for the caliper are 18 millimeter. One thing that you're gonna find while you're doing this lift is this is your best friend right here. So basically what I like to do is put my wrench on here, and it's basically gonna be used as an impact because it's hard to get an impact back there, but this will break it free. Just don't smack your hand. And then we'll hang the caliper from the hook, and we'll start pulling the rest of the suspension off. So one thing that I forgot about is this line will get, obviously it's got some tension on it, but it's not just hanging from the brake line. So we're gonna go ahead and pull this upper control arm. Pretty much that's gonna drop that, and then the brake line will have more slack, but we're gonna wanna put it back how it was when we put the lift on. So I took the ABS or the wheel speed sensor wire off of the, or out of the clips here, and then the plug is up here. You'll have to unplug it. And then usually it's got like this Christmas tree type clip here that's in the frame. You can pry down on it and slide it out most of the time, which this one's being difficult, but this one wasn't even in the frame, so I was able to just kind of pull it out. The nut for your upper ball joint is, well, mine's an 18. It depends on what manufacturer of ball joint you have in there. Some of them are 19, some of them are 18. I think I've also seen a 21 before. So mine's an 18. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that and drop the knuckle. So I'm also going to go ahead and loosen up these upper control arm bolts, or the alignment bolts, camber bolts, whatever you want to call them. I'm going to loosen these up so that once the knuckle drops, we can pretty much just raise the upper control arm out of the way. All right, so this is where it's going to get a little violent. So we have our nut off of the upper ball joint there. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to smack the knuckle right here with our hammer. And what it's going to do is it's going to release the taper that the ball joint has. And one of two things could happen. It's either not going to move, or the entire lower suspension is going to drop down violently. So keep your hands and arms and, you know, other stuff out of that general area. All right, so the ball peen wasn't cutting it, so we got out the handbag. Hopefully we don't have to get the purse out, because the purse means bad things and destruction. Alright, just like that. So now we're going to fold this thing up all the way. Perfect. So now there's more slack on our brake line here. Now we can go ahead and pull the nut for the tie rod. We can get the sway bar links out. The CV nut can come off. We can pull the bolts for the CV axle itself. And then the shocks can also come out. And we'll pretty much repeat this process on the other side. And once we get both of these torn down, then we'll go ahead, pull the torsion bars out, and then pull the lower control arms. So we're going to pull the cotter pin out here from the tie rod, and then this is another 18 nut, and we'll pretty much do the same process as the upper control arm. You're going to hit it on the side of the knuckle right here until it releases, and then you can get it out of the way. Go, just like that. Didn't even have to get the handbag out. Alright. So as I was saying earlier, this is a 36mm socket. That's going to be for your CV axle nut. Alright, so it's going to drop your knuckle off there. And then for the rest of your CV axle, you're going to want a 15mm with a long extension to get to those nuts there, or those bolts back there for the flange. And then you're just going to rotate it and pull the bolts out individually. Oh yeah, that's a long extension. Alright, now we can just pull this thing right out. I think, yes. I am correct. Cool. Toss that to the side. We'll be needing that for a little while. So we're going to pull the cotter pin out for this lower ball joint, and then it is a 22mm, just like so. Hit that with the impact, and then smack the side of your knuckle, let it drop out. Get out of there. Do that. Perfect. We're going to set this guy aside because we're going to have to pull these bolts out. Obviously, if you don't have new wheel bearings, you're going to be reusing these wheel bearings, which can be a pain to get out of this knuckle. I'm not going to be reusing the dust shields. The dust shield is sandwiched between the wheel bearing and the knuckle. If you choose to reuse it, good for you. Up here in the rust belt, 90% of these trucks don't have a freaking dust shield on them anyway, so not going to be reusing that. And then the old knuckle will be pretty much junk unless you want to sell it or reuse it down the road. If you're not replacing the upper control arms like I am, then you can skip this step of removing them. I'm going to remove them, but if you're not, you can get to the upper shock bolt or stud up here. I believe that's a 15mm wrench that you'll need, and then you can pull this lower bolt for the shock as well, which I want to say is a 22. Yep, that's a 22. So pull that out, get the shock out of the way. The sway bar end link is a 14mm nut and a 14mm bolt. So once you pull that, you can get that out of the way. And then this side will pretty much be done for now. The opposing side is the exact same. So most of the time, this is the biggest pain in the butt part. That would be the nut up top, the shock there. Even on cleaner trucks like this one, for some reason they still get stuck. So I tried with a wrench. I'm gonna go up there and probably come down with an extension and a deep well 15 and try to break it like that. But honestly, good luck to you guys who are doing it in the Rust Belt, who are doing it on a truck that's been in the Rust Belt its whole entire life, because I know I've done it before. Things don't like to come apart. So just remember, it can't be stuck if it's liquid. So we got the upper nut off. It's stripped out with a 15, so I ended up having to put a 9/16 on there, and it came off from the top. So now the shock is wedged between the lower control arm. Actually, I think it's wedged between this bracket here and the lower control arm. So we're gonna lift up the lower control arm with the jack because it still has tension from the torsion bars. So after I go ahead and do the other side, I'm going to pull the torsion bar bolts out. Good luck to you guys, because sometimes they're bent and sometimes they are seized. Mine I know are good because I've adjusted them before. So I'm gonna pull those out. That way all the tension is off of the torsion bars. Alright, so we got that lower bolt out. We can drop the control arm back down here. Just be careful not to raise it off of the jack stand. You don't want to have the truck fall off. That would be bad news. So similar to the driver's side, we got the passenger side all torn down here. As you can see, I hung the caliper on the front of the frame this time. Might be beneficial to do it this way just so you don't accidentally tighten up the upper control arm with the brake line not in the right position. So now we're going to go ahead and pull the torsion bars out. Now the proper way to do this is to get a tool specifically made for this, which almost looks like a C-clamp. Basically this hooks on to the top of your torsion bar cross member here. So another way of doing this is, once you have all of your components off here, you can actually push this down. If you choose to do it this way, which is the way that I'm going to be doing it, you can pull this nut off. That is a 24mm, and then the bolt is either an 18 or a 19. I'll have to check, but we're just going to loosen it up, drop the control arm down, and then we'll pull the keeper out. So I got this on the passenger side pretty much unloaded. You can see now I can move this keeper out, and pretty much now we have to knock this key loose, which this is a leveling key, so I'm assuming obviously it's been out before. So pretty much what you want to do is jack up your control arm so that this key drops down, and then you can hit it this way or this way to loosen it up off of the torsion bar. If you're unlucky, and this happens sometimes, well, happens a lot in the Rust Belt, it'll be seized. So there's a hole back here. You'll be able to punch it out with like an air hammer, or you can also hit it or hit the lower control arm to loosen it up over there as well. You can kind of punch it this way to get it loose. So however you want to do it, it just has to come out. All right, so as you can see, I have the torsion bars pushed forward in the control arms and the keys are out. So the thing that stinks about these 1500s compared to the 2500s is the torsion bars actually run through the frame on this trans cross member right here. So you can't really just pull them out. If you try to pull them forward, it's going to hit the control arm. You can probably pull the control arm out and then pull the control arm off of the torsion bar. But what I'm going to do is pull this cross member here that the keys are in, or that the keys are supposed to be in, and move it backwards and then pull them down. So the cross member's out. That's held in by 2 bolts with a 22mm head. The torsion bars are kicked back. So now what we can do is pull these bolts out for the lower control arm and drop the lower control arm, and then we'll pull the torsion bars the rest of the way forward. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind is that these torsion bars are side specific, so remember which side they go on. Otherwise, I believe there are markings on the ends of them. So one thing to keep in mind, because it will not go together correctly if you swap sides. All right, so with the lower control arms out, as you can see, I'm laying under the truck. Now we're gonna get to pulling the front diff. So the front diff comes out pretty easily. You have these 2 nuts right here, and then you have this wiring harness that you want to unplug, and then there's also a couple of those gray clips up here that you want to undo so that when you pull the diff, it doesn't take the harness with. And then there are 2 more bolts over here. As you can see, this is the lower control arm pocket. Here you got a bolt and a nut there, and then you've got a bolt and a nut up there where the upper eyelet is. So we're going to pull all 4 of those nuts and bolts, and then we can pull this cross member here as well, because we're going to end up cutting this pocket a little short for the new cross member. One other thing I forgot to mention as well is you have this breather tube here that you want to pull off, and then we'll put this back on when the diff goes back in. But we'll pull this out here so that it doesn't tear while pulling the diff, and then we'll get the harness undone and drop the diff down. And then of course you've got your front drive shaft bolts here. These are all 11mm, so make sure you pull that out too. So I must be a little rusty with my lift kit stuff here, because I forgot you do need to pull this nut off of the pitman arm there so that you can drop the center link and move it out of the way, or else you're going to be fighting with that upper mount there. So now with the front diff out, we are at the point of no return. We want to basically measure from the center of this hole 1 3/4 this way, which is not this first mark, it's the second mark. So this second mark I scribed out. This is going to get cut. So you want to mark from this hole 1 3/4 that way, and then from the back side too, which would be this hole, you want to mark 1 3/4 that way as well. And then use a grinder or a sawzall and just cut straight down. And then we'll weld a plate to it to strengthen it up. Then for the front diff, we're going to cut that upper eyelet off, basically flush with the top of the front differential. So if you don't want to have a lift on your truck, now would be the time to put it back together, because there's really no going back from cutting the frame. Obviously you can weld it back together and all that, but not the diff unless you know how to weld cast aluminum or you have a stock diff laying around. So we're kind of at the point of no return. So this is pretty much what you're cutting off of the frame. It's pretty, I mean, it's similar for pretty much all lift kits, with these trucks at least. So as you can see, this is where the frame was cut. And basically what we're going to have to do now is box that in. So with most lift kits, it'll come with a plate to weld in. So I opened up a couple of the packages here. specifically the one with the plate in it. So we're gonna weld this up to that pocket just to box it off, make it more structurally sound. And then we mount this to the front diff after the eyelet gets cut off. So this is what the front diff looks like without the upper mounting point. I just use the Sawzall to cut it off along with the frame. It's usually a nice straight cut. If you get one of these carbide blades, it goes pretty quick. It's not too big of a deal. I initially started with the grinder, but the grinder was taking too long and it's hard to get a nice straight cut throughout. So the Sawzall or the hacksaw, whatever you want to call it, is probably the best bet. All right, as you can see, we got the frame squared off. We got the plate welded up in there. Not the prettiest things because I was fighting the undercoating, kept wanting to ooze into the welds. So got that in. I went ahead and replaced my idler arm and pivot arm while I was down here. I will say, if you've ever replaced the pivot arm, you know the struggle, because sometimes they come off easy and sometimes you got to do a little bit of this, taking a grinder and cutting a notch into it. And then I pretty much just slammed a air hammer bit, like a flat bit, in there to spread it, and then I knocked it out. And yeah, it was pretty tight in there, as you can see. It took a little bit of work, but it's out. We got the new one in, so that's all that matters. So now we're gonna put the mounting bracket onto the front differential. So this doesn't come assembled with the bushing in it, so you're gonna have to put the Prothane bushings along with the sleeve into the bracket itself. I like to use like a silicone type grease. I still have a bunch of grease left over from when I bought the Energy suspension bushing kit for my truck, so I've been using that. So basically what you're going to do is it's only going to line up with a certain amount of bolt holes. You got 3 bolts that you got to pull out of the transfer case. My bad. The front diff, that would be this one here, this one, and then this one. And then this kit in particular comes with a sleeve. This sleeve is going to go between your bracket and this bottom bolt hole right here, which isn't utilized in the stock configuration, which means we're going to have to use the longer bolt from the set and the nut. All the rest of them are tapped, so we'll be able to use these other bolts for that. And then the torque spec for those bolts on the front diff are 30 foot-pounds. So now that we have the new mounting point bolted to the front diff, we're going to go ahead and put the drop bracket up here for the other side of the front diff there. So for the drop bracket, we're going to be using the factory nuts. And basically what you want to do is stick it up there so that the open end is towards the motor and that the slant goes toward the back of the truck. So you want the taller end towards the front, the shorter end towards the back, and we're going to bolt that up there. Alright, so it's going to look just like this. And then your nuts are going to get torqued to 65 foot-pounds. Alright, with the differential drop bracket torqued in, we can go ahead and install the front cross member, or technically the front portion of the control arm drops. So this is your new diff mount. You want to grab this one. This one will bolt to the lower eyelet on your diff. And then we are going to reuse the factory hardware and run it front to back on the frame. So we're going to throw it through the front and the nut will be on the back. It's going to look a little something like this. You see the bolt ran through the front, you got your washer on there, your nut on both sides there. Now it's time to throw the front diff in. Basically what we're going to do is line the new bracket up with this guy here. For that we're going to use the longer, so here's the 4 bolts for the new mounting. We're going to use the longer one for the front. The shorter one will be for the back, but we got to put the rear cross member in first. That'll be after we put the diff in. So we'll put that aside. And then these two are for the new drop bracket there. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to tighten it up so that it's flush. We're not going to tighten it down, and then we're going to keep the front one loose. So the diff is back in. We got the bolt ran through, but it is still loose. And then as you can see back there, the two mounting points are flush, but the bolts are not torqued down. So now we're going to go ahead and install the rear cross member. But first, you want to install your bump stops if you choose to use them. I'm going to use them just because they're in the kit. And we're going to go ahead and get this up in there. So just like the front cross member, you want to run the bolts front to back. Then you got your washer and your nut. I went ahead and threw the bolt in there for the lower mount first before I threw those in. That way the cross member could kind of hold itself up and I could work with aligning it rather than fighting 3 mounting points. The thing with lift kits is they never line up 100% exact, so you may have to use your jack to kind of leverage it a little bit, move it up and in. But we got the bolts through. We're going to keep all this stuff loose. So now we can go ahead and throw the lower control arms in. We got the new lower control arm bolts. It's going to be bolt, washer, washer, nut. So the long ones are obviously going to go in the rear because they have a bigger pocket than the front. Again, you're going to leave these ones loose. Once the control arms are in and these are ran through and it's just hanging, we can go ahead and torque the differential bolts. So the 2 new bolts here and then the 2 bolts front and rear are all torqued to 90 foot-pounds. And then after that, we can go ahead and tighten up the cross member bolts with the original factory hardware, and then leave the lower control arm bolts, which are the new bolts, loose until the truck is on full weight. So just like the upper bolts, we're going to run the lower bolts front to back on both the front cross member and the rear cross member. And now that the lower control arms are hung, we can go ahead and tighten up the differential bolts. After this, I'm probably going to throw my steering stuff back in because I don't want to get too far ahead here and then not be able to get that back in. So again, the 4 diff bolts are going to be 90 foot-pounds, and then these bolts here for the upper bolts for the brackets or the control arm drops are going to be 125 foot-pounds. With all that tightened down, I threw in my center link and tie rods, tightened all those up, and then next you can go ahead and throw in the skid plate. Again, it's going to vary for different kits, but these 3 button head screws, 1 in the back, 2 up front. You want to throw a little Loctite on them, and then they get torqued down to 55 foot-pounds. So now we're going to go ahead and install the kicker bars. As you can see, these ones have a flange here that's going to butt up to the back of the rear cross member, and then the other side will bolt up to the transmission cross member. All right, so we got the kickers mounted up, tightened up. So you can see we have 1 bolt in. Basically what we got to do here for this side and that side is we got to drill a 5/16 hole with the drill bit, and we're going to be installing this self-tapper style bolt. So it's kind of funny because I use these at work sometimes, but that's how we're going to install them. Obviously, this is a little bent. I noticed this when I did my oil change a couple weeks ago. So we're not going to be able to sink that one in there. We'll kind of just have to, I don't know, we'll figure it out, but I'm not going to sink the crap out of it because this needs to be replaced if we're going to do that, which I don't feel like replacing that at the moment. So we'll get these drilled out and get those self-tappers in. So this is what the kickers look like with self-tapper in it. Looks a little goofy because one head is taller than the other, but they are both 9/16 heads. And then we got the other side here. You don't want to crank these things down or you'll pull the threads out. And then you'll be kind of screwed. At this point, I'm going to throw my new upper control arms on. If you guys didn't get new upper control arms, that's all right. Yours should still be mounted if that's the case. But after the upper control arms, we're going to get the knuckles and bolt them to the upper and lower ball joint. With the knuckle installed, we're going to go ahead and torque the upper ball joint nut to 37, and then the lower one will get torqued to 74. And then we'll align the castle nut so that the cotter pin will fit. With the knuckles torqued in place, we're going to go ahead and install our wheel bearings. Like I said, I'm using new ones. If you're using your old ones, your ABS will be more toward the front. As you can see, there's only 3 holes, so your ABS will be toward the bumper, not toward the back. These are your 3 hub bearing bolts. These will get torqued down to 133 foot-pounds. And then, as I said, I'm not using the brake shield. If you are using the brake shield, you may, or the dust shield, you may have to trim it. I believe in the instructions it says you have to trim. So I will not be using those. The instructions also say to throw some red Loctite on these. I am not going to do that because these are a pain in the butt to get out in general. I really don't want to put Loctite on them in case I got to replace another hub bearing. So they will be fine without Loctite, but 133 foot-pounds is what they get torqued to. With the wheel bearings installed on both sides, we can go ahead and throw on our brake rotors as well as the calipers. So calipers are torqued down to 125 foot-pounds, and once we have the calipers in, we can go ahead and get our CV axles and slide the CVs through the wheel bearings. Alright, so we got the brakes all together. The caliper runs underneath the upper control arm. So previously on the stock setup it would run across here and down. The brake line now runs behind it, and there are 2 mounting holes back here in the knuckle. So the hard part now is we have to stick a screwdriver in this bracket to separate it so that it moves. As you can see, I got it a little bit so that it moves on the brake line, because we got to slide it that way and then also rotate it so that it sits flat against the posts there. Alright, I got the CV axle in. I'm going to wait till I put the wheels on to tighten this down, because it's going to be easier as the wheels will give it more leverage. I think this is like 155 foot-pounds, so I'd have to probably put a pry bar in between some studs here to make it work. It'd just be easier to put the wheel on and lower it down and then tighten it after. You just got to remember to tighten it is all. The puck is in between the CV and the diff, and then those are the new bolts for it. They are Allen head, and those are torqued down to 45 foot-pounds. I didn't torque this down yet. I gotta make sure there's nothing else I gotta fit in there before I do that. But both sides are in. On to the next thing. Alright, so it looks like I can actually tighten this down. But before I do that, I am going to install the sway bar end links. As you can see, this is the bracket for the adapters. Obviously they're not the same as factory. So in this application it says that they need to point towards the middle of the truck. So we're going to tighten them down like that and then stick the new sway bar end links in. Looks like we're getting places. So we got the brake line bolted to the back of the spindle. This is the ABS sensor wire. Not very, I don't know, I don't like how this is, but this is really the only way to where you can get full lock without this thing stretching out. So this is like your point right here that needs all the slack, because once it turns all the way that way, it's super tight. Once you go that way, it's super loose. So got the brake line pretty much in a good spot to where I can turn it either way and it doesn't bind up. So according to the instructions, we got to keep this nut loose. I think these have to stay loose too. I went ahead and installed the shocks. So the shocks are tight, the nut on top is tight. You only want to tighten those up until you start to see the prothane or bushing squish. And then these guys down here are 60 foot-pounds. The tie rod is 37 foot-pounds. That's all tightened up on both sides. I got my sleeves on here. Hopefully the alignment guys are able to pull this far enough back. If not, we'll have to trim off a little bit of the outer tie rod there. So we're pretty much, I mean, we're getting done. Now it's time to start doing the torsion bars. We got to slide those in and get the drops mounted up. So on most lift applications, the torsion bar cross member gets dropped with a drop bracket, kind of like that. Rough Countries doesn't get dropped. It just has a bracket that bolts to the lower control arm to keep the same location. Zone is kind of cool because you just got to drill one hole here, or actually the hole's already here, you just have to widen it out to 1/2 inch. And then the bracket bolts to the factory torsion bar cross member bushings, which are these, it's inside the frame rail, but these rivets here are what hold it. So both of the brackets for the torsion key cross member are bolted up. You want to keep them loose until you get this cross member in, and then after you get the cross member in, you can go ahead and slip your keys up into there and then get your torsion bars slid through the keys. So after that's all done, you want to tighten this bracket up, or the cross member up, and then you can slide these brackets up, or the retainers, into the cross member and get your ride height set with these bolts here. So these bolts are what give you torsion on your torsion bars, and that's going to raise or lower the front end of your truck. So for the zone application, the 7/16 bolts here will get torqued 45 foot-pounds. The factory bolts that run through the torsion bar cross member will be torqued to 90 foot-pounds. And then the new bolts that run through the factory mounting eyelets up here will be torqued to 95 foot-pounds. So now that we got the torsion bars in with the keys, and then the retainers and the bolts are also in, and there's tension on the suspension, we can go ahead and bolt the wheels up, drop the truck on its full weight, and tighten the front end. So now I'm going to go ahead and go back and tighten up the CV axle nuts here. Underneath the hubcaps, you got the big 36 millimeter nut. Those will get torqued to 155 foot-pounds. And then what you want to do is you want to bounce the suspension, probably using the front bumper. Just bounce it, let it settle. Then you'll go back, tighten up the lower control arm bolts to 125 foot-pounds. And then we'll tighten up the sway bar end link bolts, these lower ones, to, I want to say it was 90 foot-pounds. And then we'll tighten up the top nut there until the bushings start to swell, which is what I did. So go ahead and get all that tightened up. So these are my temporary set points for the upper control arm caster and camber plates here. And then I have the new tie rod sleeves installed on my tie rods, and those are set to where I want them relative with the front end of the truck. Like I said, it's going to have to go to the alignment shop and get aligned, and now we're going to go ahead and move on to the rear. So for most of your guys' applications, you're probably going to have blocks. Very simple. All you do is you unbolt the U-bolts, lift the rear end of the truck up, put a jack stand underneath the front part of the differential so that it doesn't flop forward. And then what you're going to want to do is put your blocks in, tighten your U-bolts down. The U-bolt torque is between 90 and 100 foot-pounds, What you want to really do is drive it around and then re-torque, because they will stretch a little bit. You don't want to miss this step, because if your U-bolts come loose, your axle can actually fall out of place and create some serious damage. I've seen it before. It's not something you want to happen, so make sure you retighten those and check those. Or if you chose to go the route that I did and buy these off-road design shackle flip hangers, then what you're gonna have to do is drill these 3 rivets out here. There's 1, 2, and then 3. This uppermost one, this 4th one, is actually open because the bumper, one of the bumper bolts runs through it. So there's those 3, and then there is a rivet here for a support that supports the factory hanger, and then you have to drill a hole for this guy here. This side is already open for this rear one. You don't have to drill that one out, but on the passenger side, you do have to drill a hole for this one here. But essentially all it does is it flips the shackle upside down. Usually the shackle goes upward. This one is going downward, and it gives you 4 inches of lift without having to run a block. So the other thing you might have to do is buy different U-bolts. As you can see, I have a very tiny little U-bolt here. Another thing I should mention is if you do these hanger flips or shackle flips, whatever you want to call them, you will have to cut the exhaust. So as you can see right now, it's just sitting like with an axle dump. The only reason for this is it'll interfere with the leaf spring, which kind of sucks. So you'll have to get it either remade or just stick with the axle dump, which is pretty much what I'm going to do here. And then, of course, you got your shocks. This is pretty straightforward. They just bolt to your factory locations, nothing different there. For the e-brake line, I got rid of mine just because I live up in the salt belt. They never work anyway. But basically all you're going to do is move them around to where there is no tension when the truck is at full droop. So with that, the lift is done. The truck is back together. I'm going to insert a couple clips so you guys can see what it looks like. As you can see, the control arms are nice and level here. There is plenty of play in the suspension. It is not super stiff. It rides actually very good, but it's got a little bit of squat in the rear, so I might buy like a 1-inch block, maybe to lift it up a little bit more, but it sits pretty level. I'm content with it because I can actually clear these 33s now without wiping the fender out. So let me know what you guys think. Like I said, here's what it looks like.
To the flood again, the same old trippy was back there. So I made a big mistake, try to see it once more.